Welcome back, wannabes and creators, to another episode of The Complete Creative, the podcast that helps you do things with creativity. Today on the show, I am thrilled to welcome back Kris Simon, my co-editor of the Cthulhu is Hard to Spell anthology, and Shelly friggin' Bond. So if you don't know Shelly Bond, she is one of the seminal editors of the 20th century and 21st century. She was one of the founding editors of Vertigo. She worked on just so many incredible comics. I can't even name them. She was the editor responsible for the Black Crown imprint at IDW. She did the Femme Magnifique and the current Kickstarter Insider Art. Yes, she has a Kickstarter right now, which is why she is on this show. We're going to talk about Insider Art with both Shelly and Kris, as they were two of the 8 editors on the project, and Shelly oversaw it all. And I'm just so thrilled. When I made a list of the top 10 people I'd like to have on this show, when I first started it, she was one of them. I highly, highly recommend Insider Art on Kickstarter. I bought the PDF, and now I've also bought the soft cover. I really absolutely love it. And you can also find my book, Ichabod Jones Monster Hunter, which I also love, on Kickstarter right now. We have just released the second volume. This is the second podcast in our sort of Kickstarter month series. So please head on over to Kickstarter, check out both Insider Art and Ichabod Jones Monster Hunter Volume 2. And now, as I've been doing recently, I'm going to put you into our conversation already in progress. You guys both have worked with, I don't want to say difficult, but let's say people who are ambivalent to deadlines. And I would like to know, like, what is the best trick that you have ever learned to get people to get their pages in on time?
Shelly, you want to take that one first?
Well, I thought you would never ask. Okay, first of all, I'm a little reticent to give away all of my editing secrets with the first question. But I will say, I think that's the most challenging part of editing, is tapping someone on the back very kindly and saying, get away from the page. It's hard to know when to call it quits, because I think a lot of people either overwork their stuff, or they are just not ready to let it go. So the trick that I have is to give people impossible deadlines, like to set up your first deadline and know that almost no one can meet it. That way, when you call them to ask them where it is and they tell you their tale of woe, you know you have at least 48 hours to really get them to hustle. And for me, that does the trick. Or else I come over to their house and I stand over them and watch them with a really mean look on my face.
How about you, Kris?
Mine's a little bit easier. I just had the deadlines like hardcore. So essentially you get started way in advance, but you keep the deadlines like you haven't started in advance. And then knowing that pretty much everyone's going to blow it, and you've got a buffer of at least 3 weeks. I mean, at the least. Sometimes that doesn't work. But the majority of the time, I think it can save some bacon for sure.
And I think, in fairness, sometimes just the threat of firing someone shows them how serious you are. So sometimes I send people a list of all the people I fired. And I know like right now, David Walker, who I'm working with on Bitter Root, he said that I bring the thunder and lightning, and he's legit afraid of me, and he calls me the brick behind my back. So I think sometimes having a reputation like that means that you don't have to say too much other than the F word, which in my case is fired.
I love that. I told my editor that I was scared of her, and she's like, "How could you possibly be scared of me? I'm so nice." And I'm like, "Yeah, you're nice, but like you hold like
my future."
Yeah, and like very few people in my life like have the kind of sway that you have. Like you could be like, this all sucks, and I would have to like go back and redo it. And like it's something that
it's power.
Absolutely. It's absolutely power. Yeah, I had a funny story. I'm a friend of mine a couple of years ago, or maybe it was last year. I don't know. Time is weird these days. And
It
he
is.
was like, he called me. He's like, I think I'm getting padded because my editor stopped being nervous when I was late.
Huh.
And
Yeah, that's pretty astute. Yeah, that's a telltale sign, I think.
yeah, because like he's like my editor was always like very nervous when I would miss deadlines, and then suddenly the last 3 deadlines I missed, she didn't say anything. She was just okay with it, and I was like, "Yeah, you're getting padded. Like it's not great that you need to get padded, but at least like they're not going to freak out every time that you're late with work now."
Exactly.
Yeah, unless
So
it's like, is there who are the pages getting turned into? If it's a publisher, with a set print date, then that's one thing. But if they're self-publishing it and it's arbitrary, then that's another.
Yeah.
well, you guys make a good point because you guys have both. Well, I know Kris and I'm assuming Shelly too have worked with people who are self-publishing as well as at a publisher. How for somebody who like doesn't have that deadline of a publisher, how can they get better at like meeting their own deadlines instead of just blowing it off?
Well, you legit have to pick a date. There's no question about it. And I'm the kind of person, like, I am a creature of habit. And I love cheat sheets. I love to be cross-referenced. And so I like to rely on tried and true methods. And so for me, back in the day, and when I say day, I mean 1980, because I'm not going to reveal my age. But, we had a theorem for like what kind of targets you'd have to meet to maintain a monthly shipping schedule. And so when you hired someone to write a monthly script, you of course, like Kris said, you would start out 6 to 9 months in advance to like, of course, get 3 books in the drawer. But to write a 20 or 22 page script, like let's say a traditional comic book script, it should take you a week. And so that week means your deadline is a week from today. And if it's a Friday, the editor would get the script. And then I would say I tried to turn around my feedback within like 48 hours. So once the writer would get my first round of notes, I would want the rewrite to come back in less than a week. So, you have your own metric and you have to stick to it. But I got to tell you, I think that's how we were able to cultivate some of the greatest writers in comics, if I can be so bold and stroke my own ego. But I think that a lot of us, including Kris, we kind of came of age in comics in the 90s. We all had our own particular methods of editing, but there's nothing like having a deadline where you can't put off your editor. You have to just get the work done. I think a lot of people writing comics now sit around and think about writing comics or get on Twitter and talk about writing comics, but the actual art of typing the words and submitting the draft, I think that is a crapshoot. And I think most people are not writing, or certainly not writing enough. And I think sometimes they're afraid to let it go. And that's a big problem.
Absolutely. Kris, do you have anything to add to that?
That was very well said, and I agree with it. I think for the writers, it's a little bit easier. At least it should be a little bit easier if they already have something in mind, or if they already know what they're going to be going for. Then yeah, we turn around. That should be no problem whatsoever. The art is a little bit more difficult, because I don't know. It's just artists take a little bit longer. Some can do a page in a day. Some, take longer depending on how detailed they are. But yeah, like I agree with all that. Like sometimes you just you got a deadline, man. Knuckle down.
Yep. And that was one of the beauties of working for Vertigo in the 90s. Like I think that in today's market, you have to knock them dead with issue 1 because you probably won't have an issue 6 if you don't come out of the gate strong with your first storyline. And so back in the early 90s, when we would finally hire teams for one of our books, let's say it was like a book like Hellblazer that was like a company-owned book, we would have the outline for the whole year set, usually before the writer would actually sit down to write the first draft of issue number 1. And that was the beauty of long form, and I miss it so badly because while miniseries are fine, and while thinking about comics in TV arcs are fine, which was, something that evolved and I think became more common in the 2000s, what was genius about the comics of the 90s and what I loved is that you could hire someone like Mike Carey, who was really a newcomer to comics when I started working with him on Lucifer, and he really got to cut his teeth on that series. And it wasn't easy for him or the entire team right at the gate. It took us all a while to find our footing. And in fact, with that book, Kris Weston was our first artist, and Kris did a wonderful job on the first 3-issue storyline, but he wasn't quite as happy with his work, and he left the series. So we actually had a fill-in artist, Dean Ormston, who took over the art on issue 4, and it was with issue 5 that I hired Peter Gross, who from the very first moment he and Mike collaborated on paper, they were like the dream team. The two of them together made Lucifer into, I think, a successful series, and now it's a successful TV show. But that team, like every team, has growing pains, and it usually takes at least 3 issues until the writer and the artist and the letterer and the colorist and the editor actually find a groove. So I think what you're seeing in today's market is quite sad because you have publishers who can't afford to take a chance on developing talent. And you also have publishers firing people at the top of the ladder. So you have all of these talented editors who have spent many, many years and decades earning their stripes and working their way up the corporate ladder, which takes a tremendous amount of time. And when they finally get to the point where they're actually, sort of commanding their own imprint or their own part of a universe, they're the ones getting eliminated. And that means that all the other editors coming in and the new editors aren't getting training because so many of today's editors are paper pushers or they're actually just facilitators. And they're not taught the craft of editing, which is mighty and so important.
Ooh, that's just a great segue to a question that I had, because I would love for you to talk for a little bit, both of you, about what is your theory of editing? What makes a good editor? What should someone be doing to improve their skills, and what do you look for in an editor when you're hiring them?
Kris, over to you first.
All right. Well, I can honestly say that one of the most valuable things that I have learned is to know when to dig, your fingers into everything and when to completely lay off. A lot of times, you come across editors who literally just want to put their imprint on things. And so they meddle with it,
Yep.
almost like they want to be the writer themselves. And so they just kind of interfere and they nitpick, the wrong things because it's to their tastes instead of wanting it to be the best it can be on its own. You have to influence the writer. You have to enhance the story, make them the best that they can be without taking your personal likes and dislikes into it because it's not for you. As an editor, you have to recognize the audience that it's geared towards. And sometimes that might not be you, so you have to recognize talent on its own. And I think that's one of the biggest things that a lot of editors are missing now is they just want to put out stuff that they personally like, which I think is holding them back in a way.
I couldn't agree more with what Kris says. I think a lot of editors don't really understand what it means to edit. And a lot of them are frustrated writers. Or in my case, I was always called a frustrated art director, which I found hilarious because I have more of an arts background than I suppose a lot of editors. Back in the day when I was starting out, most editors had an English degree or an English literature degree. And I came from a film background. So I had an editing as in videotape and film and audio tape degree, but I also took art classes and 3D design. And so I came to the table, of course, needing to know correct grammar skills and syntax, but I also came with this new understanding of visuals. And so I came at it from a different side. So what I think is super important when you're editing is to remember that what you bring, what the passions you have and your other interests are important to bring to the table. And you don't just have to be a super fan of superhero comics to edit comics, but you have to be mindful of every aspect of the process. And the process of editing comics that's tremendous is the fact that it's the art of collaboration. And I think that that is what we were able to showcase so beautifully with Insider Art. We were able to salute and celebrate the fine art of comics as art form, because there are so many different parts of the chain, from the very tiny kernel of an idea of a comic to the execution of it all. And it's a chain reaction. So to me, the editor is master control. The editor is responsible for everything you see from the logo on the cover. If you can't walk into a comic book store and read that logo across the room, fire the editor. So for everyone who teased me about being an art director, I challenge you to look up Milton Glaser, because I follow his philosophy for what makes a great comic book cover, which includes a readable logo. An editor is responsible for everybody on the team feeling that their work is valuable and appreciated. And that goes for the letterer. So while you might not be able to letter comics, it'd be a really good idea for you to understand how a comic book letterer goes about doing his or her or their job. And in fact, that's something that I've loved doing over the past 2 years. I've actually been lettering some of my own work, and it's fascinating to me. I thought I knew quite a bit because I had the opportunity to work with Todd Klein and Aditya Bidikar and Clem Robbins, John Workman, some of the greatest letterers in comics. And I've been known to be a stickler for comic book ballooning because I believe in the flow, the left to right, top to bottom. Don't cross your tails. Watch the kerning and the ligature. Hate tangents. So it's important to know the language. And I think whereas Kris's point is the number one, like you got to know when to like put your thumbprint on it when it's not working, but you also have to know when to step back. You also have to be educated, because you can't expect your artist who may have gone to art school, who might have a degree in illustration or sequential storytelling. How can they respect you if you don't know what a horizon line is? How can they respect your art direction if you don't know the difference between fine line or stippling or cross-hatching? You need to really know your terminology, and you really need to understand all different parts of the business and the industry so that you can really confidently say that you're master control, the all-seeing eye of every aspect of putting that book into the world.
Well, let me flip this around and say, how do you know when to pull back and like let the art speak for itself, or let the artist or creator speak for themselves, and even if it's not something that you would do yourself?
I think that that is a matter of just an editor knowing their business. I mean, so, you can see story flaws in a story that you don't like. You can see that they're burying the lead. You can see, that the ending is way off base and not as strong as it could be. You can see these things, regardless of whether or not you're a fan of something, and I think that's when okay, we got to go back in. We got to figure this out. We got to replot. We got to do, some tweaks on this. You can see when dialogue is bad, or if it works really well. These type of things, happen to everybody. It could be a matter of an experienced writer not finding the voice of the character just yet. It can be, something that's they had an idea in their head, but they don't quite know how to execute it perfectly, and that's where you come in as an objective eye, and you're not as close to it. It's not your precious baby, cuts, precious. So, and I think it's when you do have all those things clicking on all levels, it's very easy to take a step back and say, yeah, you know what, this is working. This is working really well. And I don't need to step in and change it because, you're doing well. This is good. This is strong, and so you kind of like step in where it's needed and you don't when it's working. So, and everybody who's experienced in this sort of thing should know how to do that. They should know, the when to go in and when to step back.
I think for me, it's an instinct. And I think the best editors have vision. I think they have core instincts in what they like and what they don't like, and no apologies. I have to say, I've been spoiled because I've had my own imprints. And Black Crown was a great example of my love for music and comics. And I was really lucky to have that chance to put together 10 books that blew my mind, that really cherished and looked at story, I think, and art in a very different way. And so for me, I know what I like. I know what I like to read. I know what captures my interest and attention. So for me, even though I totally get what Kris is saying, and sometimes you're hired to do a job and you actually, you might not like the genre, for instance, but you still got to be pulled in by the characters because every story's been done to death 100 times. How many times can you read a pitch on heaven and hell, order versus chaos, a fish out of water story? It's the characters and the situation and how your inner heartstrings are tugged at that will make you a reader of this book or someone who's just going to stop reading. And I always say, when I sit down to do my first edit, anything that distracts me from getting from page 1 to page 22 means there's a problem for me as an editor with this story. So if I'm reading it and I'm laughing at the jokes, but then I hit a point in the story where I'm like, oh, I want to go get a cup of tea, big problem. And it's usually a structural problem because I'm bored. It's like maybe the writer is new and didn't realize that if you have a 22-page comic, you don't want your opening scene to be 9 pages because that's almost half the comic. It could be something fundamental, but I always suggest, at least for me, as a reader, I want to read that script and I want to sit on my hands because as an editor for over 30 years, my instinct is to take a red pen or a red butcher knife and start obliterating. But I really want to read it the first time all the way through just to see if I can feel anything about it. If I don't, it's a big problem, but it's only a big problem that demands a conversation with the writer. And that's another thing that I see that is not happening enough these days. I see a lot of editors are editors on email, and they say, hello, how are you? Where's my script? And that's it. They don't get the kind of feedback that people deserve, which is a phone call to hear enthusiasm. And when I go to make that first phone call, especially to a writer who is sometimes an experienced writer who I've worked with for 25 years, that phone call to tell him that the work is shit, well, you better believe that there are 3 things I'm going to tell him or her or them first that I love. Because if you can't find 3 things to point out, even in a terrible script, you shouldn't have hired that person. And maybe you should fire that person. So I feel like there's always room to salvage things. A lot of the time, it's because the editors are not trained to actually go about having a conversation and having a constructive session of feedback with their writer or with their penciler or with their letterer, for instance. I think a lot of times, because we're dealing with social media and because we're dealing with email, so much is lost in the tenor. And the tenor on email is so misleading. And there's nothing quite as important as the human contact of, at least, if not in person, the voice-to-voice feedback.
I definitely agree with that. I want to move on to insider art because I've had a question I've been dying to ask you since I read it like 100 questions I've been dying to ask you. But, you hear a lot about books being a love letter to comics or a love letter to art or a love letter to writing, but it felt like insider art was a love letter to editing. Did you intend that when you set out to make it?
Yes. I did. You got me. I didn't think anyone would notice. I have to confess, yes. So I've always felt like I was put on planet Earth to be a comic book editor. And that was even before I knew comic books were still being made in the 90s. I love the art of editing. I'm a deconstructionist by nature, and I love to pull things apart. I'll have to blame David Bowie for that one because one of my favorite albums is Station to Station, David Bowie, 1976. And I always loved reading about that particular time of his life in Berlin because I had heard that he wrote the lyrics for Station to Station, cut them up, threw them up in the air, and then reassembled them. And even if it's not true, and even if I'm making that up, that's why I wanted to be a comic book editor, because there's nothing more fascinating than finding people from disparate places, whether that's different parts of the world, in this case, Insider Art. We have artists from Greece. We have writers from South Africa. We have Canadian talent. We pretty much go all over the world to bring people together. And to me, there's nothing more exciting than finding a handful of people who would never have met except for wanting to tell a story together on paper and pass the baton and literally go from person to person, from place to place, and come together to make a statement and hopefully change a life in that way. So yes, you found me out. This is a love letter to editing in all its bloody red inked glory.
I love it because, well, I mean, I don't know any of the editors personally. I mean, I know you by reputation and your work, and I know Kris like personally. And I was pleasantly surprised that you could pull out the personality of at least the two of you, who I've had such experience with over the years. I'm assuming the other 6 editors as well. And each of those pieces, the way that it's constructed is, well, maybe you can talk about how it was constructed because you made it. But I love how the editors and each section felt unique in a way that I don't know if I've ever seen in a book before, where you could really say, so you could tell that this editor's style is like this.
That's
and
awesome.
This editor cares about this stuff.
I'm so happy to hear you say that. I hope other people would notice that. To be honest, we pushed it a little, but not as much as the 150 female and non-binary creators that were invited to join us. I think as editors, we're used to taking backstage. We're used to pushing other people into the spotlight. Kris, do you agree with me on that one?
Yes, I totally agree. Absolutely.
So with something like this, the beginning of the pandemic, everybody was, upset, rightly so. Pencils down was the new 2-word buzz line going around at the big companies. And I saw a lot of obnoxious postings. I still have a lot of friends in comics, so there was plenty of vitriol on my phone line. And I thought, God, we can't do this. We can't just sit around and let this garbage happen. So that's really when I decided, let's put a book together and let's show them how it's done. Because a book like this, no lie, and again, I think Kris can back me up, if this was left in the hand of some corporate suits of any kind, I'm not pointing fingers at any company, of any kind, this could take anywhere from a year to never. It could take 4 years to put out a book like this. People are so afraid to collaborate at this volume of this magnitude because they say editing is herding cats. That's such a small part of editing. Editing is bringing people together to champion a cause, to come together and to speak truths about things. And so for me, I was like, you know what? I want to do this. And I knew that if I did it myself, it would take me 6 months because I put together Hey Amateur, and I did that in less than 6 months. But I knew realistically I couldn't possibly handle a book of this magnitude myself. So I went to the Facebook group called Comic Book Women. I noticed that Amy Chu, who you might know is a writer in comics, she was talking about doing a Spoonflower fabric jam with a bunch of artists to raise some money. And I thought that was a terrific idea. I loved it. I love doing crafts. So I thought, yeah, let's do something like this. But I wanted to take it 6,000 times further. And so I said, hey, let's do something bigger. Let's do an anthology. And so I reached out to Jen King, who is a retailer who really supported so many of my Black Crown titles and my Vertigo books over the years. And I reached out to her first, and she was definitely in. I thought she'd be a great person to have on hand to help me with the retailer side of things. And I reached out to Mariah Huner, who happened to be one of my former assistant editors. And so that was a great thing. And Kris, I recall, was one of the first people to actually respond to the request.
I was, yes. I saw Mariah post it. And the original conceit was a little bit different. It kind of evolved over time. And originally it was, this blueprint of a house with different rooms, and there's a cat that wanders from room to room, kind of introducing, the stories. And then there's an object in every room, and you can click on an object, and the stories are going to revolve around that object.
Actually, I have to interrupt you there. That wasn't the original conceit for the book.
Oh, really?
And I'm only telling you that because I always had planned to have 8 different rooms, and I wanted each of the editors to curate and edit their own section. And I didn't want to micromanage people, but I did have to set up a few parameters. Mm-hmm. Kris is bringing up something that was really wonderful that I wish would have worked out. And I didn't mean to interrupt you, Kris, but I want this to be on the record because it's important. Allison Sampson is an artist in the industry, and I've known her for many years. She reached out and said she wanted to be a part of the book, and she's also an architect. So I actually asked Allison if she would want to draw the blueprint of the house, and I thought perhaps we could do sort of a website to correlate, to sort of go side by side with the actual book. And so in the very early days, what Kris is describing is just sort of the foundation, if you will, of the house itself. And unfortunately, and I was super bummed, but Allison wasn't able to fully contribute. And she was super bummed about it. She had a big project going on. She was doing a Sleeping Beauty book with, I think, Stephen and Owen King. And she also was based in London, and there were a lot of problems with the pandemic. And so I wanted to interrupt Kris just because I also wanted to take a moment just to thank Allison, because even though she never really was able to contribute to the project, she was such a champion of the idea, and I know she really wanted to. So by interrupting Kris and actually setting the record straight, this is my chance to say thank you to Allison anyway, because she's amazing.
That's awesome. Yeah, I had no idea about any of that. I came in after that. I think it was one of those things where, the original, the concept that's presented, as in like, hey, we're looking for editors. You each get to curate your own room. So you get to reach out, to female and non-binary creators, and you get to do whatever you want to do in your room, as long as it relates to your room. And so, of course, immediately all the editors, you go for the room that you most connect with. Obviously, Shelly, for you, it was the garage because of your garage band dream.
Yep. That has still not been realized. And even after doing that video, would you believe I've had no messages about that? You would think, right? I thought Mick Jones from Big Audio Dynamite and the Clash was going to see that video and actually call me up and be like, hey, Joe Strummer would have wanted you to replace him. We're going to reform the Clash. Would you be the guitar player?
Even though that you can't.
Right? But my love for Joe, it would just be enough. But no.
Well, that was one of those things where, it just, everything just kind of fits together perfectly in that regard. Because you got to live out some dreams for your garage and how to start a garage band and all this like amazing stuff. And and I did the same thing with the kitchen where I got to and honestly, it's almost like creators are drawn to you. So, when I said like, oh, hey, I'm doing this stuff, it's for the kitchen and this is what I'm going for, I feel like the ones who responded were the ones that it connected with. And literally every story idea that came in was something that I was totally on board for. It was just, it hit all the notes perfectly of what I wanted my room to represent. And I have a feeling, that it was the same way with other editors as well, because we were recommending people to each other.
Yes.
It was pretty great. It was a fantastic collaboration, and even the cold bathroom. I mean,
right? I think Nicole deserves like a special trophy, which might have to be like a gold-plated roll of toilet paper or something. But poor Nicole, she was the last one in, and I tease her relentlessly about this because we were on a Zoom call with all the editors, and somebody had to say it, and I think it was Chrissy Williams. We were joking around and saying, most of us assumed that the bathroom was just going to be one big joke. And Chrissy said, I said, like, if we were inviting a bunch of guys to edit this book, Chrissy said, oh, they'd call it inside fart, which, we thought was hilarious. But Nicole told me that at first she kind of was surprised that she was given the bathroom because she thought, God, what am I going to do? But then she managed to blow her own mind. She turned the whole thing around and she made it this wonderful sanctuary for self-care and rejuvenation. And I got to tell you, I think it's one of the strongest rooms. I mean, all the rooms were great, but I think she did such a great job. She also went out of her way to have a little bit more of a conceit where she made sure that there was a story that was targeted for each different age range, from like young children all the way up through, I guess I'll say octogenarian, but I'll just say people older than me. And I'm kind of up there mid-century. But I thought that was actually pretty cool. And something that Mariah Huner did for her attic section, which I thought was quite nice, she was getting a lot of black and white art in. And she said she wanted to do sort of a transition from starting out with black and white and then slowly unfolding to color. So I think you'll find that each of the editors, and in one case in the basement, we had a co-editing team, each editor or editorial team had their own conceit. So it was never just, oh, I'll take a little of this and a little of that. Everybody, I think, took care to curate their rooms in their own special way and bring in things that were not just comics or that were not just crafts, except, well, actually, I should say the craft room notwithstanding. But I think everybody knew that they could bring in things that were like a bit different. So like, for instance, I had Vita Ayala and Sally Cantorino and Gab Contreras contribute a game board. And it's not only a game board that Vita pitched to me as Candyland meets Little Shop of Horrors, which I started sweating. Little Shop of Horrors is like a favorite theater show, so that's something that was fun. So we've got the double page spread of the game board, and on our website you can actually download it. We've got the game pieces that Sally did a beautiful job crafting and making sure they were representative. They were representative of marginalized genders and not just like what you would expect for people as game figures. And we have the rules of this game, which are terrific. It's kind of like Parcheesi, but it's not. You have to see it and play it to believe it. So each editor made sure to fill their section with things that were just unique. Although I have to give Kris some serious props because she put a lot of great recipes in her section. And I'm someone who can barely boil an egg. So I will tell you, I've made the banana bread, which is divine. And I know I look forward to actually sharing her family's secret recipe for apple cider pie, which her dad, I heard, was not too happy about.
Well, I
tease her.
I stopped reading the book at one point, and I went to my wife and was like, did you know you could make catnip tea, like out of catnip, and it's supposed to like help reduce anxiety? And
that was pretty amazing, right? Kris, is that the one you wrote as well?
That is correct. That's me.
Yeah, it was lovely to watch the for instance in your section and much of my research called you the mod editor, and then you had mod libs.
Oh,
and,
me?
you had all of this, yes.
Oh, who, me? Why,
That's
thank
you.
you.
That was the reoccurring theme of people said you were a creative a creator's editor and a very present
Ah,
editor, but they also called you the mod editor. And then when I
ah.
read your section and saw mod libs, I was like, this is just like the perfect representation of like everything that I've just been reading for the last 2 hours about Shelley.
Oh, I'm sure my parents paid you to say that. Thank you. It's just, you know what? Like, I'm at the age now in my editing career where I can't help but just be me. Like I can totally be objective. And if somebody said to me they wanted to hire me to edit a Western in outer space, I'm going to hesitate, but I'm going to say, would you mind if there's a soundtrack that's by LCD Sound System? Like, can I somehow find something in this project that feels me? And if not, we probably shouldn't work together. So I appreciate that. I appreciate that you like that about my section. Got to give props to China Clugston Flores because she is my mod sister in Comics Crime and Other Matters. And she was a big part of the joy in working on this book. She not only designed our original house cat, which is a tuxedo cat, which I'm sure you noticed. He was on the double page spread with the credits when you first open up the book. He's a very cheeky cat. He's the one who has the canary and a few other things, and his feathers actually are spread throughout the book. China also not only did the Mod Libs drawing, which is hysterical, but she also did a brief history of garage rock, which I thought was a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, both of them were great. And Kris, I've had many conversations with Kris about food, over food, at places that like we talked about food, and so it was wonderful to see that, and it was wonderful to see the craft room, and it was wonderful to see like all of these things that like it really felt unique in a world of comics that does not always feel that way.
Right? Well, thank you. I wish we could find 100,000 people like you because right now on Kickstarter, we are trying so hard to bring people together so we can put these books in their hands and print. Because as you might know, the whole initiative actually was put together thanks to the generosity of 150 female and non-binary creatives because we wanted to raise money for our own. We wanted to raise money for the retailers who are female and non-binary who were struggling and continue to struggle. So at the time of this project, we weren't even sure if printing companies were going to be around to actually print books. So we decided to be smart. And I know that a lot of people were getting flack, a lot of the big companies and the indie companies were getting flack that when pencils down was the new phrase, nobody went to digital. Well, that's what we did. We went to digital, we went to Gumroad, and basically we asked people to pay what they want. We suggested $10 because that's still hopefully not a lot of money for people. It's like the cost of a really fancy coffee. We thought it was fair for 270 pages of comics and crafts and cats and games and just the experience of something fun to enjoy, entertainment, a little escape, a little coming together as a community, and all the money that we raised, which is now closer to 6K than 5K. We're delighted to divvy up that money between 28 comic book retailers who reached out for our help. So that's been a great pleasure. And in fact, we're keeping the digital version on Gumroad, and we will continue to give that money to the retailers in question. And it's our great pleasure. And every contributor donated their time and their skills, and we're not paid a red cent, which is one of the reasons why we wanted to go to Kickstarter. We wanted to make sure that not only could we put this book in print, I mean, it's got a really fat spine. You are really getting your money's worth. It's $20, which is honestly a steal. I think a book of this size, you'd probably have to pay $40 for from a publisher. So it's $20. And if we can meet our goal, our target goal, it's all or nothing, 25 grand. If we reach that goal, we can also afford to pay each contributor a little something because let's face it, everybody is financially strapped right now. So it was kind of a bummer. We had hoped we could pay the creators in the beginning, but we couldn't. And that's not really what the project was about. And no one wanted to be paid. I had a lot of people contributing extra things, and they were actually said it gave them hope. It was something to do while the rest of the world was falling apart. And I know it helped with my anxiety. And that's one of the reasons why I put the project together, because I didn't want to sit on my butt and just complain and just be depressed. I wanted to step up and make a difference. And I really hope that people can look at this project, and when they think back to what they were doing during the pandemic, I can at least guarantee you that 150 of us will hold up this book and be proud, because we made a difference, and we will continue to do so.
You should be very proud of this book. Kris, can you talk a little bit about your experience on this book?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I thought it was just one of the best opportunities to come out of the pandemic. And it's, my job hadn't slowed down at all since, I work for a video game company. So I wasn't, furloughed. I didn't have any pencils down, nothing like that. But it also left me, I don't know, feeling a little empty, I guess, because, you feel helpless when there's a pandemic going on. All of your friends are losing their jobs and you're all working from home. Everyone's isolated. And then this kind of a collaboration came along, and it was an opportunity I jumped at because, the opportunity to connect over this project with all the different editors, all the different creatives, and everybody just doing this voluntarily, just gave you kind of a sense of like camaraderie and fulfillment.
Yep.
And it was just a really beautiful thing. And it all flowed so smoothly. There were like a couple hiccups here and there, but honestly, it was just fun. It was just
Yep. It really was. And to go back to your first question, the deadline, of course there was a deadline. There had to be a deadline. And I made a really tight deadline on purpose, because I knew other people were going to come up with this great idea too.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're seeing that now. You're seeing that there are all these quarantine books and, books about isolation. And I think a lot of people had that instant reaction. Oh, let's put together a book about escape, and let's put together a book about better times. And, there's nothing wrong with that by any means. But I didn't want to do one of those books. I wanted to do a book that could not only represent these pandemic times, but I wanted to do a book that, like, if your kid is homesick from school, pull out Insider Art and do a chapter together. Make some of the crafts in Sophie Dodgson's craft room. Or maybe before you go to bed at night, like, your mom can read a story from the bedroom to help you go to sleep. I think back to my years at overnight camp, and sometimes they were not fun ones. But whenever I had like a big compendium with me, at least that would save me. It would give me something to do. And so there were many, many reasons that I wanted to do a book of this magnitude. It's audacious on a lot of levels, but it proves that when you put the right people together in comics, with no drama, we leave the drama for inside the story. There's always too much drama in comics. This is the good part of comics. This is the art of collaboration and camaraderie, as Kris said. And it was a great joy to work on it. And I have to say that in addition to dreaming up the project and, of course, editing Garageland, I also insisted on designing and assembling the book, because I'm about a year in on my lettering career, which is perhaps I'm the first editor letterer in comics. I'm not sure, but I want someone to fight me on that, because I think I am. And I love design. So this was a chance for me also to be the assembly line and be part of the production. And so that was such a great pleasure to be able to design so many of the stories. And while many of the editors of their rooms hired their own letterers, I didn't feel offended. I could pitch hit at the end. So if there were some problems, at least I could come in and, help out and maybe make it a little bit easier for the final, which again, we're so proud of. We can't wait for everybody to actually get their hands on a copy. So I'll say the Kickstarter address for anyone who's listening who finds it super exciting, who might want to actually order a book while they're listening. It's kickstarter.com/projects/sxbond/insider-art. You can check out our whole campaign there. And there's a really cool video too, by the way.
Yeah, you absolutely should, because like I bought the book because like of course I was going to buy this book on the digital, and then when we scheduled this, I was like, I'm now have a reason to like move this up 300 in my queue to like right now. And as I was reading it, I was like, God, really do want this print. I really want this in print because it's like so beautiful. And
thank you.
And I have one last question as we're moving out, because you did something really interesting about with the PDF, whereas almost every other PDF I've ever gotten chose to like do single sides, like to do like the not the full splash. And when I opened this book up, I was like, 130 pages. Like, that's not that bad. It won't take me that long. And then I realized about 5 pages in that everything was a 2-page spread.
Yep.
Was there a reason why you chose to do it that way?
You know, there are a lot of double-page spreads in the book. And I think that as a reader, you should know that. And if you choose to actually zoom in closer for your reading experience, that's fine. But I think a lot is lost for when you read digitally and something comes up as a single page. Anything that stops my reading experience is troublesome to me. And I have trouble with that when I read digitally. I don't like when I can't figure out, this balloon, it's not finished. Oh, okay. Oh, all right. I need to read this as a spread. That bugs me.
No, I appreciate it, because and when you're reading on Comixology or digitally, you also often have to like flip your phone in the middle of reading the reading experience. So it's very like, if for nothing else, you should get the book. If not the digital, at least the digital, to like see the 2-page spread. Because I opened it and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like this totally solves the problem of like you always having to flip your phone every 4 pages.
Yep.
I mean, of course, you should go to Kickstarter and get the physical book, but like maybe you should do like me and get both. I don't know.
I like your way. I like your style. I like your way of thinking.
So as we leave here, as we leave the show, I just want to give you one last chance to tell people where they can find you. Please give like one last sort of takeaway piece of advice. It could be something you said before, or something that you haven't yet, that like you think really is important to the making of comics or the editing of comics. You can, Kris, why don't you start, and then we'll go to and end with Shelly.
Sure. Okay. Well, Insider Art is actually on Instagram, on Twitter, as well as Kickstarter. So you can find us there, as well as me. I'm usually Kris_Simon or Kris-Simon. And one of the things that I think was so great about this project is, number one, I got to work with Shelly.
Aww.
Great. And we became fast friends, and it was amazing. And so that's the best thing that happened out of this. Not to mention the fact that this book is legit one of the coolest all ages compendiums that I've ever seen. And I am so proud to be a part of it. And
yay.
I will forever be proud of this book for my entire life.
Wow. I don't know how I can follow something like that, although your dad has been paying me to be friends with you. And he's still mad at you about the secret family recipe. You can also get this book on Gumroad, and all the proceeds from the digital version on Gumroad go to our wonderful female and non-binary comic book retailers who are on the front lines all the time. Please go to gumroad.com/insider art. I believe that it will take you right there, and you can get the beautiful double-page spread PDF that Russell was just raving about. And I just really want to thank Kris, who has been such an amazing partner in editing Crimes, not only just in general on Insider Art, but she's really been the backbone of the Kickstarter campaign with me. And without her, again, I could have done it myself, but I would not have been sane right now. It's really at least a 2-person job. So Kris has been the best. And I want to thank all the other editors too. And I want to just quickly say their names because they rock. And you should look them up and follow them on Twitter. We have Chrissy Williams, who edited the bedroom section, Nicole Boos, who we teased. She's the bathroom editor. We have a 2-headed cat beast, co-editors, Elizabeth Bree and Megan Brown. They edited The Basement. We have Sophie Dodgson, who is the greatest thing to happen to comics in a quarter of a century. She is one tremendous talent, colorist, designer, fashionista, clothing designer. She designed the cover and the logo for Insider Art. And she also has some illustration in the book. So she's a name to be reckoned with and a force to be reckoned with. And we also have, help me out, Kris, I'm sure Mariah, we mentioned, the Attic editor. I must be forgetting someone.
Besides Jen King.
Jen King, our retailer liaison.
Yeah, and that's it. You got everybody.
All right. And thank you, Russell. Thank you so much for hanging out with us for about 50 minutes and letting us talk at you about editing, the greatest job anyone could ever have.
Well, thank you for stopping by. So that was my interview with Shelly Bond and Kris Simon. Pretty awesome, right? I absolutely loved it. If you did as well, make sure to go and check out Insider Art. It really is a love letter to editing. And also, while you're there, check out Ichabod Jones' Monster Hunter, my love letter to, I don't know. God, it's weird. Like, it's not a love letter to psychopaths or anything like that. It's just an awesome comic. My love letter to awesome comics. So check out both Insider Art and Ichabod Jones' Monster Hunter on Kickstarter right now. Make sure to subscribe, rate, and review this show, and I will catch you next time.